So good evening, everybody. I am Paula Aldarelli, Executive Director of Earthshare New Jersey. Very excited to introduce the third in our series of Environmental Equity Today. Michelle Langa has been the attorney for a number, I believe, of nonprofit organizations and is currently working with New York, New Jersey Baykeeper and the Hackensack Riverkeeper. But the work that she's doing isn't just for them, it's for everybody. And I think that that's one of the greatest things that we can learn through these webinars on a quarterly basis is the work that individuals are doing that has an impact on all of us. So I'm very happy to turn the evening over to Sarah Holman, who will be your moderator for the evening. And I hope you enjoy this session of Environmental Equity today.
Thank you. Yeah, so Michelle will be joining us today to talk about the legal side of environmental justice and things like public access to waterways, Superfund sites, and the legal side of that. And then at the end of her introduction presentation, we're going to dive into some questions. So put your questions in the chat or raise your hand at the end of the presentation, and Michelle will try her best to answer them. um, Michelle, if you want to share your presentation and get started.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Find it again. Okay, so as I said, I am Michelle Langa. I am the shared staff attorney with New York, New Jersey Baykeeper and Hackensack Riverkeeper. Most of the work that I do, unlike many attorneys, is in policy and advocacy rather than litigation, although I do get to dabble in that now and again. Um, the priority for us generally is stormwater, clean water, um, Superfund, and public access to all of our natural resources. So the first half of my job as a shared staff attorney, my time is split between Hackensack Riverkeeper and New York, New Jersey Baykeeper. Riverkeeper has been active now since officially 1997, one of the founding members, along with Baykeeper, of what is known as the Waterkeeper Alliance, a worldwide movement now of waterkeepers around the world in, I believe, 6 continents and over 60 countries. I could have those numbers a little bit off. The Hackensack River is 45 miles from downstate New York out into the Newark Bay. Its ecosystem is above the Oradell Dam, a source of water, drinking water for over 1 million people in northern New Jersey. And below the Oradell Dam, a tidal brackish water that includes the New Jersey Meadowlands, which is over 8,000 acres of protected wetlands, which is a really beautiful place if you've never seen it. I know a lot of people know the area for, things like Newark Airport and the Turnpike, but if you sort of get off that beaten path a little bit, you see some really beautiful wildlife. And the other half of my job is with New York, New Jersey Baykeeper. Baykeeper handles an area that is known generally as the New York, New Jersey Harbor Estuary or the Hudson-Raritan Estuary. That essentially starts from the sort of lower Passaic River down through Newark Bay into the Kills, the Arthur Kill and the Kill Van Kull, and Raritan Bay down into Sandy Hook Bay. We also do a little bit of work in Jamaica Bay on the New York side, just south of where our Hudson Riverkeeper colleagues also work. Between the two organizations, our missions are very well aligned. And so I can work on, very sort of regional and statewide initiatives that help both areas specifically, but also benefit the sort of wider, most specifically the regional area, and then sometimes statewide initiatives, as far as something like CSOs. We have 21 CSO communities in our state that we work on. And through New York, Jersey Baykeeper and Hackensack Riverkeeper, we filed a suit against the state way back when in 2012 to pursue a fix for combined sewer outfalls in the state of New Jersey. This is sort of one of the primary impacts to clean water quality in our state. It's a situation where the sewer systems are combined. So your sanitary system that leaves your home, so your wastewater from things like,
Michelle, sorry if I could just interrupt you for 1 second. Is there a way that you can make the slides bigger, full screen? Because right now on Zoom it's split with your camera screen.
oh, sorry. Let
Yeah,
me
no worries.
let me see. Layout. There we go. Is that better?
Perfect.
Sorry about that. I meant to change that before.
Oh, you're good. Thank you.
No problem. Sorry about that. Um, yeah, so if you could see, you could probably see it better now. The small diagram on the lower right that shows what that combined system looks like. In heavy rain events, the sanitary sewers and the storm sewers, so those are the drains that are essentially found in your streets, the ones that have the little fish on them that say no dumping, this goes out to your river. Um, they combine because there's too much for the system to handle, so it can't go to the treatment plant. It goes overflow into the waterway untreated. And so, as you might imagine, that's a very sad situation for water quality. In addition to the sort of standard stormwater issues that we face, as far as things like runoff from agricultural uses, runoff from the streets. So there could be things like gasoline or car oil or fertilizers used in landscaping, salt during the winter when we salt our streets. That all ends up in our waterways anyway, because of how that system is designed. And so when you add to that household waste, you are adding dangerous sort of bacterium and other sort of complications that can affect health and our enjoyment of waterways. The picture on the lower right is kind of an idea of what that kind of outfall could look like when a CSO event occurs. And you definitely don't want to be swimming or kayaking or even just sort of standing near it. There could be an odor associated with it. And so all of these things sort of affect our enjoyment of our natural resource, our waterways, but are also dangerous as far as making it an unhealthy situation for water quality. And then sort of speaking to public access, access does not necessarily always mean physically touching the water. So it doesn't mean that you have always physical access to the water as far as being in it. It means being on the water. It means being near the water. It means being able to walk along a beach. If you are in a shore town that has beach access, surf fishing, surfing, all of these things are the different ways that we can use and enjoy our waterways. And in particular, in the northern half of the state, it's a harder thing to do because of industry, because of development, condo buildings, industrial buildings, warehouses make that physical access to even get near the waterfront harder. And so we are working and have been for many years now to update what the public access rules mean, and including things like um, appropriate signage that allows people to know that they are permitted to walk along waterways, signed areas so that folks know that they can get to a waterway, facilities, things like parking and restroom facilities, and perhaps water. If it's an area known for fishing, maybe some amenities for fisher people who, might need somewhere to cut bait or throw away line. And so all of those are aspects of public access that we fight for. And it might not seem so far that I'm talking a lot about what, sort of environmental justice or equity sounds like, but these are issues that more often than not and disproportionately affect communities that we would consider environmental justice communities, because those are the communities that have been historically industrialized and or sort of created physical barriers for communities between themselves and a waterway. So if you think of someplace like the city of Newark, where there was a lot of industry along the river, and that industry led to what is our next topic, Superfund. It it creates a physical and a sort of it's not even a tangential barrier. It's a thought that the river is dangerous because it's contaminated. And so people over generations have sort of stepped away from embracing the river as a place of recreation or as a place of just sort of um, enjoying their time outdoors because of things like industrial pollution, physical industry that literally blocks access between a community and the waterway. So we are, I don't know if it's great to be the first or the best in this, but we have 115 Superfund sites in the state of New Jersey. Um, Three major sites in our area alone in northern New Jersey, which are the Lower Passaic River, the Lower Hackensack River, and the Hudson River, are all major Superfund sites in our area and are all in some aspect of process of being cleaned. The Passaic is probably closest to being complete in that they're about to start dredging in the next couple of years. And that process is something that has taken nearly 40 years to get to. So you can imagine the frustration of the communities and that sort of frustration and lack of advocacy is part of why I really enjoy being part of the community advisory groups for both the Passaic River and the newly formed community advisory group for the Hackensack River, because it brings community to the table to be a part of the process, to be a part of the future of a natural resource that we all care very much about. So whatever that might be for that particular community, the Passaic, the Hackensack, the Hudson, it brings the community members in so that we have a say and that we can question the responsible parties and we can question EPA and the proposed remedies they're giving us. So many of these aspects also touch on sort of giving community voice, is giving a chance at an equitable cleanup over time, which is amazing and something that I think a lot of communities don't feel like they maybe had a say in how the water bodies got to where they were. Because if they did, they probably would never have been that contaminated. And so having a seat at the table now to be a part of the solution, it gives us agency and more control over the stewardship we can provide for our resources. There's also a fairly large site down on the Raritan that is former lead. So you can imagine that that was also a very complex cleanup. So I think really one of the biggest points to make in the work that I do is working with others. I can't do what I do without relying on partners. I am a legal department of one. I don't get the sort of benefit of a whole staff of other lawyers and paralegals to help with the issues that we work on. So being able to collaborate with others who have sort of knowledge bases and experiences that I don't personally have really helps to inform and round the work that I get to do and the regional and statewide sort of policy advocacy that I get to work towards. When we're talking about something like CSOs, we're talking about something that affects primarily in the Northeast, but also as far south as Camden and the Delaware watershed. So we never look at anything as how could it fix this problem for us. It's how can we make this not a problem for anyone who is in the same situation or in a similar situation. And so working through partners is one of the best ways to see that happen. It's about community, whether it's our specific community or the sort of greater regional or statewide community. And we do this because water quality impacts so much of our lives. It's not just clean drinking water. It's folks who want to fish. If you can't eat the fish that you catch, that might impact your personal enjoyment of what you're doing. If you can't swim at a beach near your home, that affects your life. If you can't find a place to sit next to a river and read the newspaper for a morning and have a cup of coffee, that negatively impacts us as well. So this is part of why we fight for what we fight for. And there are aspects of all of this that we can touch on um, and possibly still affect change. I don't think it's too late to get some change back when it comes to sort of climate related issues. There's certainly still time to slow the development that is happening in our cities to a point that it is taking up all of our open spaces. I think we can still, dial that back a tiny bit to make the balance a little bit better. Um, and these are all the sort of things that we and our partner groups work on a sort of daily basis. And oh, one of the things I forgot to mention, we also work on some industrial stormwater cases, which are some of my favorites because they look at communities who are sort of industrialized and look to corporations or businesses that are not meeting standards as far as how they are operating their facilities and impacting the stormwater system surrounding them. And so what we do is sort of call them out, um, essentially threaten to bring them to court over their failures, and ultimately, more often than not, sit down and come to terms with them to meet all of the standards and then put funding back into the community to do some repair for the harms that were caused by any of the things that they had done before that were not up to snuff. And all of that is done under something like, not something like literally under the Clean Water Act and its citizen suit provision and the permitting that is engaged in that through the New Jersey Pollutant Discharge Elimination Systems permitting, which is a lot of letters to say every facility should be permitted for what it could potentially release into our stormwater. And if they're not meeting that, folks like us are there to kind of step in and bring them into line and up to standards so that the water is not as badly impacted. Um, so that is all I have on the slides because I really hope that we have some really good conversation through questions. I didn't want to bore you by speaking at you for too long. And I feel like I probably could go on and on and on.
Thank you for sharing. That was a great presentation and hit on all of the major things that we spoke about in our conversation about Superfund sites, public access, CSOs, all the things that are impacting our relationship and experience with the waterways, especially in North Jersey. I have a few questions that I thought of during the presentation that I'd love to dive into. And
Yeah.
then if anyone else has questions, send them in the chat or just raise your hand using the Zoom function and we can get into that. So
I know that was like a lot of information to throw out. It's hard to give a sort of bird's eye view of some of these things because they are so nuanced.
mhm. Yeah, I understand that. There's a lot of information and I can understand you have to pick the important, what should I include, everything. So when you were talking about how people kind of have a perception of the waterways as contaminated sites and like not something for recreation or enjoyment, how do you think we move from that like view of seeing these rivers as contaminated, don't want to be around them, not interested in them, to being places that people are going to, enjoying? I know you're talking about like meaningful public access and what that looks like with signs and proper amenities. If you want to dive into that a bit more.
Yeah, I think, a huge part of it is um, access, like physical, visual access is a starting point where people start to recognize, oh, there's a waterway here and it's just a short walk from my house and I can maybe go fishing or I can maybe go kayaking or I can maybe if you have, kids who are students at some of the local schools go and race in crew boats. That's sort of the starting point of recognizing that there even is a resource there that can be potentially used. And then it's a lot about outreach and education in the community to say it is safe. You can kayak on the Passaic River safely. Um, the the worst of the contamination is in the sediment. And so if you are not wading in the water or eating the fish or say crabs from the water, you are not likely to be harmed by it. The only exception to that might be in the 48 to 72 hours after a really heavy rain, because there are several CSOs along the Passaic River. So you would want to stay away from those areas. But it's really just providing people with the education and the access and the amenities um, to know that it's safe and it's fun. And once folks get out and are on the river and get to kayak, they're excited.
Mm.
They see, fish and wildlife that they did not realize were there. I mean, I did it too, even, some of the first times that I took tours on the Hackensack River. I didn't realize we had great blue heron in the Meadowlands. And it was wild to see this like dinosaur of a bird just sort of standing there on the side of the water. And so when you get that opportunity, you want to go back and see more. You want to go back and learn more. And you want to do something to make sure that others can enjoy it as well, which is kind of, in a way, how I ended up where I am. Yeah, I love these things and I want everybody to sort of see and appreciate and have access to them too. Um, so yeah, that's a big part of it. So things like when Newark does their riverfront days and they offer eco tours and they offer kayaking and canoe mobile, these are all ways for the community to say, hey, that's something I could do, and then find other ways to do it more as their time allows. And it would help if our municipalities in our state made sure that the rules and regulations are protective of the best possible water quality.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a good point. Just I feel like as soon as you see even like the water by me, I didn't know we could kayak in it until I saw someone kayaking. I was like, oh, this is an option. That's great.
Right.
So it's just like kind of I feel like seeing it that it's even an option, like you said. I want to, I know you were talking about all the super funds in New Jersey, but I realized we didn't really get to dive into exactly what a Superfund site is, like how something gets deemed a Superfund site for people who don't know. If you want to kind of go into what that is, what's the legal process of that, and yeah.
Yes, I realized that after I made the slide. Um, so I actually have a little bit of experience in this. When I interned at Hackensack Riverkeeper way back when, I was part of a meeting with EPA Region 2 officials to talk about investigating the Hackensack River as a potential Superfund site in its entirety. And so I got to be a part of the process from the very beginning. I drafted the first petition to study the river to see if it qualified um, under what is known as the National Priorities List or Superfund. And so EPA has a certain criteria and they do an incredible amount of studying. It took them a little over a year, close to 18 months of doing sampling of core sediment, water quality, um, bathymetry, which is basically like the sort of wave movement of the water. Um, they test out what kind of gravel is at the bottom. Is it fine? Is it, grainier? And then they do all of their tabulations and see, does this meet a certain threshold that would qualify it as listing on the Superfund list? And the Hackensack River uh, happily met those criteria. Um, it's definitely a mixed bag of, is this a good thing or not? Because obviously, if it makes it to the list, it's because it's a very heavily contaminated sediment. But that also means that we now have an avenue for undoing that harm over time. And so the next step was the EPA formally listing it to the national priorities list. It goes through a sort of a federal process of being in the register and then taking comments. And then once that process is done, it is officially listed, which happened for us in September of 22, I believe it was. And that kicked off the sort of formal process now of starting the cleanup. And so that means assembling the responsible or potentially responsible parties. It could be one responsible party. It could be 120 responsible parties. It all is dependent on what site you're talking about. And EPA starts to negotiate with each of them, and each of them is assigned a sort of percentage of responsibility. It might be that one company has a sort of a stretch that they are more responsible for because of locations and how water moves. And then EPA is currently doing its first study to provide us with a feasibility study report, which will tell us what their plan is for an early action along the river. And it's a frustrating process because it is very time consuming and it takes a very long time. Partly because of all of the testing that goes into what they're doing, and that takes time, but also because there are a lot of sort of backdoor negotiations between EPA and the Department of Justice lawyers and the responsible parties to iron out all of those agreements for what they will pay for, and in what way, and what sort of services they'll provide. And we've had sites where that kind of gets tied up for years, just to iron out whether or not a facility will be built to handle the dredge material that's going to be taken away. And it's hard to keep people sort of upbeat about the process when they're dealing with this for an entire generation where their grandparents are telling them about this contamination. And so I understand it. I understand the frustration, but I also see the amount of work that goes into designing these plans. So I try to strike a little bit of balance in between to kind of keep the hope up. And so, the Hackensack River, the Passaic River, um, the Hudson River, and dozens of other sites around our area they're on their way, one small step at a time to being a better place. And every little bit of contamination that's taken out is better than being left behind.
Yeah, when you were saying that, I was gonna ask how you keep momentum going when it's these projects that just take years and years and years, but it just seems like you just gotta keep going and keep doing what you can, keep the awareness, and yeah, as long as it's moving in the right direction, which it sounds like thanks to your work and I'm sure a lot of other people's work, things are moving in the right direction, so that's good.
It's a never give up kind of thing.
Mhm. I just saw we got a question in the chat from Mike.
I
They,
co-chair for the Hackensack River CAG,
uh,
right? You, Mike?
I,
Yes.
um, Mike said, what would you say are the key steps for someone looking to break into environmental law, and what's the best way to gain meaningful experience early on?
I came to environmental law sort of the long way around, um, more out of a personal desire to protect something I love, which is the water, because I like to be in it and I want it to be clean and healthy and safe for everybody to be in. So you can kind of come from a variety of different areas, but the ultimate spot is law school, right? So you have to slog through that. Um, Focusing on the sort of areas that I found were most helpful for sort of environmental work. So for me, it was things like environmental law, law of the sea, um, maritime, public interest law, because a lot of the work we do is sort of like based through nonprofit organizations. So sort of that sense of working in a way that is giving back as much as sort of creating change. And I think the best way to get experience that is meaningful is to work with local community groups. Work with the people who are in the community that you hope to serve at some point in time and learn what the issues are. Listen, ask questions, have them show you, where the problems are. And if there is a way that the work that you intend to do can help, offer that up as a way of partnering. Um, it's been really humbling to meet and work with a lot of the folks that I've gotten to work with, people who have been working in environmental issues in New Jersey, up and down the state for decades. And just sort of the passion and the fire that they kind of bring to it is part of what keeps me going. Kind of want to, live up to that.
It looks like Maya is her hand. If you want to ask your question.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. I appreciate it. Michelle, thank you so much for this presentation. It's great to hear about these kinds of things. I really appreciate it. I had a couple of questions, but they're kind of tied together, so I'm kind of just going to ask them as one thing. It was really interesting to hear that you guys kind of find these corporations that aren't in compliance and you kind of sit down with them and get them to comply, because normally you think of that as like a DEP thing. You normally think that they're the first ones to intervene. And obviously that can take a really long time, for somebody to even catch that there's an issue. So I would love to hear more about kind of what that looks like for you guys, how you go about doing that. And possibly tied into that early on, you mentioned that you have some experience in litigation, that sometimes it comes to that. And generally, I would just love to hear more about that if you have anything else you'd like to share about it.
Sure. Yeah, so the industrial stormwater cases that we bring, it often comes out of community. We've had members of our community who have said, you know what, there's a cement um, site near our house, and they wash their trucks in the street at night when nobody's around. And so something like that is something that we can handle. We can send them a notice. We can say, look, you guys are not in compliance with your permitting. Sometimes the facilities don't even have a permit because they somehow flew under the radar of, oh, well, we don't really need one, right? And they just never got it. And we've had instances where the facility owners have said, you know what? We didn't even realize that this was a problem or that this was something we had to do. And now we're going to take this to all of the facilities we have and make sure that everybody is in compliance and doing the right thing, and have sort of created really good environmental partners in neighborhoods. And we've had a few that just absolutely do not want to comply. They would rather pay the fine than have to deal with, installing something like a zipper drain on their property, which goes across their driveway so that any dust and dirt gets sort of knocked off as the trucks roll out. Ultimately, it is less expensive to install the best management practices that would keep them in compliance than it would be to pay between $30,000 and $50,000 a day for being out of compliance under the Clean Water Act. So they do typically comply in time. I don't think we've had any that actually had to go to like a full litigation over it, just sort of negotiating back and forth over, we choose this door to close in our facility versus that door, and those sort of minor changes. And it really is about getting the community sort of better neighbors and making sure that the waterways that these drains are kind of feeding into are not unduly burdened by things that shouldn't be in there to begin with. Because there's already enough that gets sort of washed in just naturally. I have done a little bit of litigation on my own. Yeah, Paula, absolutely. most of it happens through sort of the administrative law process for the work that we do. So that is, say, if the state issues a regulation or a permit that we think is not ideal. Um, for instance, my very first case ever, literally my first case out of law school, my first case with Baykeeper and Riverkeeper, was for a facility in Rahway that was planning to house clean fill on a former landfill. And we did not feel as though that former landfill was properly closed and could handle the weight and sort of um, physical strain of having clean fill brought in. And we were also not entirely sure that the clean fill was really clean. They couldn't necessarily qualify that. And so we appealed the permit that DEP issued, and that went through three attorneys because I was the third one who actually finally took that to court and had to argue that in front of the judges, which was very exhilarating in the most terrifying way. Um, Unfortunately, we did not win that one. The state typically has sort of that home rule advantage where, if DEP is doing something, you really, really have to prove immeasurable harm for that to be overturned. And it was just one of those sort of fine line cases where they beat us. Um, so yeah, I do kind of wish I got to do a little bit more of that. But I really enjoy the sort of long-term, wide-ranging work that I get to do when it's about sort of like looking at something like the public access rule and how can we make that better and how can we incorporate urban waters more when the original rule was very focused on sort of shore town locations. And they also have their issues, but they're not necessarily always the same as the issues that we see in sort of urban waterfronts, where you have like ports and airports and, facilities that claim homeland security restrictions, uh, and just the physical separation that happens that is not always present at the beach. Um, so yeah, it's fun to get to work with the communities and really sort of learn more. I'm constantly learning from everybody that I get to work with, and that's a lot of fun, and it always informs what I get to do next. And I hope makes me better at what I'm advocating for.
I saw Paula mentioned in the chat, which I was also going to ask about, if you could share more about how local community organizations, in addition to environmental nonprofits, have gotten involved with water contamination issues to help make change happen.
Yeah, so there are I kind of separate the drinking water issues from the water contamination issues that I work in, only because I don't necessarily work in the sort of clean drinking water side of the world. But local organizational groups have definitely had a big impact on making sure that the sort of things like lead line replacements have happened. On our side of it, it's more about um, things like the stormwater management rules, um, things like the municipal separate storm sewer permitting that happens in our state, which each municipality essentially is a member of either MS4 or CSO as far as where their water goes. So MS4 just means that they are separate and they do not have CSOs. There are a handful that have both. Um, so that separate system is sort of, there's rules that sort of oversee how our water is impacting our waterways. So our runoff, essentially. So development is part of it. Green space is part of it. Roadways. There are still roadways in our state that don't have a stormwater management system built into them. So any runoff from that road goes right into a waterway. New development. There are newer requirements that are making developers add more green space, more stormwater controls, so that the impact of taking away green space for buildings is reduced or minimized in exchange. And so all of us as organizations have kind of grouped together to tackle reviewing these rules and the permits as they come out and really making informed and thorough comments in exchange. And on certain occasions have joined together to fight by appealing permits because they were not good enough. We appealed an MS4 permit back in 2017, and that essentially got us nowhere, but we still had our foot there to say, this is not right. And then the next round of permits ended up incorporating a large portion of what we fought for in that appeal into the permit. Because the folks, honestly, who are working in some of these areas at our DEP are really good at what they do, and they're trying their hardest. And they face a lot of opposition by other organizations who want to promote development and building. So having organizations like ours and like a lot of the or groups that we work with together, making our voices loud, helps to push back against that sort of barrier that some of the permitting faces to see the light. It's not easy. We don't always have the most voices or money to fight as hard and loud as some of the other side does. And that can be frustrating, but it's all about sort of not giving up, not letting up, not giving in, and keep pushing for what's right. And eventually we will get there. It just unfortunately can take longer than many of us would like.
Yeah, I remember you also when we spoke talking about how in Jersey City there's a lot of community involvement. They're protecting green spaces and even things like bird tours and bike tours and stuff like that helped people kind of like want to protect the space and become advocates for the space and stuff. So I know even on a small level,
Yeah,
just by doing those
absolutely.
things, it can make a difference and people will want to get involved.
And having, the support of a good parks department, a good sort of municipal um, bend towards having those sort of spaces and sort of protecting and promoting outdoor activities as something that is important, it does make a difference.
Yeah. I was gonna, as we're wrapping up, I just want to see if there's any other questions that anyone had. Mm,
Yeah, I would say the reverse of what you were mentioning about Jersey City is what happens in a place like North Bergen, where they're trying to sort of take back Green Acres park space to build a school. And the community has been fighting against that for well over 10 years now, I believe. It was before I started doing this work. And, that is the sort of indicative of, a municipality who is not promoting sort of positive, forward-thinking use of their green space. The more we take away, the more flooding happens. The more we take away, the less sort of, our air quality starts to degrade. Our just our view of wanting to be out of our homes changes because it doesn't look as nice. It doesn't feel as nice. You don't have the wildlife habitat anymore. All of those things kind of come into play. So it really does start sort of very local by making sure the community is electing the folks at the municipal level who support what they want to see. And then from there, kind of just continuing to advocate for, what they feel should be done and is owed to them because it is. We hire, or we elect, but we are essentially hiring people to represent us at even the city level, and they need to do that. And so that's, sort of where that community take comes from. It's that collective choice to advocate for the thing that matters most.
Yeah, I'm aware of the North Bergen situation. I have a friend who lives there who's been very active in that process. But um, yeah, I see. Sorry, hold on. Yeah, thank you. I'm trying to see. I'll do one last call for questions.
Schultz has a question.
Oh, yep, go.
Let Michelle finish her drink first. Michelle, are you aware of, since we've got so many older cities, um, so many of them are pre-American Revolutionary settlement times.
Yeah.
The towns that are not CSO communities that upgraded their systems, now we're faced with a tremendous building boom. Residential buildings, large apartment complexes going up all over the place. Uh, the towns that are not CSO communities, is anyone monitoring how often or what happens when these sewer systems get overwhelmed with uh, the, the more intense storms that we've been getting lately? And what happens when their system is so antiquated and they're not CSOs, but they keep overflowing and overflowing? Um,
Yeah.
who
That is-
monitors and who checks?
Well, in a perfect world, RGP would be sort of monitoring their permitting and their development so that they meet all of the newest requirements under stormwater management rules for new development or redevelopment. And the municipal leadership would also be taking part in that permitting process and should theoretically be planning their build outs to meet. So this is where it becomes a sort of cart before the horse kind of thing, where a lot of communities are facing the need for housing and building, but their sewer systems are already insufficient to meet the needs of what exists today. And rather than expanding their system while they're expanding their development, they're sort of backpedaling to add capacity to their water treatment facilities. And it just becomes so like the city of River Edge. I have friends and family who live there, and their basements flood and their streets flood because it's not even as dramatic as building multi-unit condo buildings, but it's houses that are being upgraded. And so you've got neighborhoods full of single family, one bathroom homes that are now, single family, four bathroom homes. And then that's going across multiple blocks. And so now the system is just getting more and more and more. And in time with that, our rainstorms are getting worse. And that's not helping. So, yeah, I don't know that aside from fighting for stronger regulations with MS4s again, because they are due, I believe, next year for the permits to be renewed and revised again. And we will, like we always do, review those and see if we could push for better and more protective sort of language within them. And I'm not the only one that's looking at these. We have, partner groups that I'm sure you know as well, who are also working on them. But we face a lot of pushback from the developers, and it's hard to outshout them.
Well, you've got pushback from the developers, but then on the political side of it, there's no press event for opening a sewer line.
No.
So,
And
it's hard to convince the politicians that this is what's necessary.
Yeah, and there's no tax income to a community on a stormwater rain garden. So that gets harder to sort of advocate for.
Mhm.
Yes.
I can't type faster than I can say it. Is it, is there any, is there anyone advocating or working towards the requirement of master plan review for these communities that are doing all this growth? Because that seems to me to be where where it has to start. You know, you once you have the problem, you have the problem. But if your master plan has to be reviewed in conjunction with all of the growth that you're doing, I it seems logical, but I'm not an attorney, that would find the problem and prevent them from being able to build.
Yeah. And so over the last year, um, folks, there was a state plan commission for the state of New Jersey to sort of update the state plan, including sort of each municipality's part in that. And again, there was just I attended a lot of the sort of state plan conversations that were held through the Highlands Council. I know they held a few of them. Um, and there was just a lot of pushback of saying, well, we need the housing, we need the schools, we need this, we need this, we need this. And it's like, okay, fine, but why does it all have to be in the small stretch between New York City and the sort of Passaic River? Um, if you were really thinking it through and planning it, you would be sort of directing growth to the areas that can handle a little bit of growth now while you're sort of updating areas that are maybe in need of some better sort of infrastructure to support growth. But again, we're just sort of doing everything backwards where we're taking the people in and sort of building to meet that rather than helping to sort of drive them to a sort of better planned, more um, logical direction.
Thank
And
you.
it's frustrating. It's something that I thought the state plan could really maybe have a little bit of an impact, and I feel like it just ended up having no teeth at all. Um, they just sort of rolled back much of what would sort of press. Part of the MS4 permitting is a watershed management plan, which is now forcing each community to go through and map out their systems. Some of them have never done that, to make sure all of their outfalls are identified and all of their pipes are identified, so that they can better manage, maintain, and preserve the function of those pipes. So the next couple of years are going to be telling to see who has really, sort of bought into that as something positive and helpful for their communities and who is fighting it.
Michelle,
Yes.
um, you mentioned the master plan having no teeth, and that's been a problem. It doesn't have any enforcement power. Do you or any of your cohorts have any plans to fight for some enforcement of the state plan? Because the state plan does have some restrictions on environmentally sensitive areas in Area 5, Planning Area 5, and 4B. So it would make sense to give them some enforcement power. But right now, we have tried to use the state plan at the county level in Monmouth County, and they just laughed at us and said, well, that's just an advisory. We don't have to pay any attention to it. So any efforts to put teeth in it?
The pushback that we've received has been the sort of lack of funding to enforce through something like DEP. And it's an issue that we faced a little bit with even just sort of what we call NJPTES permitting and the New Jersey Pollution Discharge Elimination System permits, which facilities get for things like, scrap metal or automotive or, so on. DEP has the enforcement power, but often don't have enough staff or enough resources to actually enforce the rule or the permit. And it also takes state level um, political will to push that. And even when we have a favorable administration that is very supportive of a lot of the work that we do, and by we I just mean the sort of the nonprofit, clean water advocates like I am and many others are, it's still hard because their priorities might not be our priorities. And so they might be willing to spend some political will on one project, but that's not the project that we need them to do it on, when it comes to enforcing things. And so, short of having sort of a state plan as an adopted rule, I don't know that even we could enforce it under a sort of Clean Water Act style citizen suit.
Mhm.
But that is often the hook that we look to, um, when pushing back against things that don't make sense or that are harmful. Is um, is there a tie-in to the Clean Water Act that we can use to get our foot into a sort of legal argument
Mhm.
what's happening, or an appealable permit, for one purpose or another, if it's something that is being permitted that we think is wrong.
Absolutely.
Sorry, hope I didn't bore you all with permit talk and the sadness of
Exactly what we
having to
came
fight
for.
against our own.
Um,
I have another question for you, Michelle.
Sure.
So, because you're talking about MS4 permits and everything, and I I work for Rutgers Cooperative Extension, the Water Resources Program, so I'm a little familiar. We've been working with MS4 permits a little bit, and this morning I was in a meeting with my boss and my coworkers, and we're doing the MS4 permit stuff for Middlesex County, and he exaggerates sometimes, so this time frame might be a little exaggerated, but according to him, they've had the permit since 2005, I believe, so for 20 years, and apparently they threw it on a desk and left it there, and nobody's touched it, nobody's done anything with it for years and years and years until finally they got audited by the EPA, like very recently, and we're told, you're going to owe us $3 million a day if you don't finally do something about this. So now they come to us, like we need help, but it's hard to wrap your head around the fact that like they can get away with going for such a long period of time without doing anything about actually complying with the permit that they have.
Mm.
And I just wanted to know if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, that was one of the many things we appealed, or was one of the things that we used in our appeal of the 2017 MS4 permits, was that, you know, even if everything in the permit was something we wanted, they're not being enforced. And that's frustrating. And it takes something like the EPA to come in, and we're in a time right now where I don't see the EPA doing a lot of this auditing going forward, at least not in the near term. So it's up to us to find ways. And the common thread that I've found with both MS4 and CSO is funding. And things get pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed because, well, we don't want to devote funding to this or we don't want to devote funding to that. And it becomes a matter of priority. And then we're back into that sort of terrible space of, well, what's a bigger priority for us? Is it putting up this new school, or is it paving this main road, or is it fixing, um, you know, providing maintenance to our sewer system? And the sewer always kind of falls to the wayside, kind of what Bill said earlier. There's no ribbon cutting for sewers. And so it becomes that sort of forgotten thing that is so important and so impactful. And it gets hidden, it gets lost in the struggle of everything else that's going on, housing and schools and, you know, political fights over, whether or not you're going to build a new hospital or a new warehouse or, things like that. And that's kind of why we have to just keep speaking up every time and forcing and pushing and begging for more enforcement. And there is no answer. Like there's no easy way to fix it. And I'm sure that it was probably Chris, wasn't it? Um, like he's not wrong because MS4 permits in, very similar form to what they look like today have been in existence for probably that long now. And it was just a choice by the municipalities and the county to not address it. We don't want to put we have X amount of money and that's not it. That's not what we're fixing today.
Mhm.
Michelle,
Yeah, yeah.
well, I had one municipality in my area, on the lower Raritan, a headstrong mayor turned around, says, "Oh, they can't tell me what to do with my town." And when they were supposed to join in with a county utility authority, and they insisted, "No, we're going to treat our own sewage." And eventually the arguments continued and continued, and just like you said, ignore it, until finally it got to a point where the DEP came in and said, "You're either going to join the county utility authority, or there will be no longer there. You can no longer add any sewage connections to the system. You can't construct anything in your town with a bathroom." Who doesn't have a bathroom? Every structure. But that's what finally forced the hand, and the municipality had to comply. But it's a shame that the municipalities, you can't convince some of these politicians, that some things just have to be done.
And that's really where we fight for community education and engagement, because the communities are the ones who pick their municipal leaders ultimately. And so, and it's hard because there are other priorities for the communities too. I think we've seen a lot of that over the last several years, especially when we're talking about communities that are also environmental justice communities. But we can't give up trying to make this a priority as much as we can, because that's where it's going to come from. It's going to come from each individual community fighting for better of their infrastructure. Sorry, I totally went over.
You're all good. I'm happy that we got so many questions and got to talk about so many important things. Thank you so much for being here today and sharing all of your knowledge and experience with us. I know we all really appreciate it. I'm going to send in the chat for everyone some links to EarthShare and to the organizations that Michelle is affiliated with. We will have another webinar in November 18th. You can register through the Environmental Equity Today link I sent in the chat. That's going to be about Jackson Woods. It was an abandoned, unsafe kind of park, but not really park people would use. And someone saw that, wanted to make a change, and now it's a great community oasis with Girl Scout troops doing gardens there. It's a beautiful space, and yeah, so that story will be in November. But yeah, thank you so much, Michelle, and thank you to everyone for coming today. Hope to see you again in the future. Paula,
Thank
if you have
you.
any other closing remarks? All
No,
done?
just, thank you to Michelle and thank you to everybody who participated, because as great as Michelle's content was, it's the questions and input from those who participate that make it even better. And, it is the hope of Earthshare New Jersey that, conversations like this continue and it helps to educate and bring more people to the table to make change happen and for all of us to have cleaner, greener, and healthier tomorrows, because that's the goal.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me and get out there, get to your municipal meetings, speak up, find out what's going on in your towns. That's where it starts.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone. Awesome. Thank you.
Hope that was good.
Yes, perfect.
Turn
Oh,
off the record.
yes, yes.